Escaping from Eden, Chapter 10, Loving the Alien. This is not how astronauts talked when I was a boy. When I was growing up, any talk of extraterrestrial species or ET contact was confined to easily debunkable encounters reported by witnesses who could be easily dismissed, ridiculed, or ignored. At least that's what I saw on the TV. I know now that there was a reason for this. From the 1940s until around 2008, it was common for governments around the world to employ officers whose remit was to marshal reports of unidentified craft and aerial anomalies. The job of these UFO officers was essentially to filter the reports. Those encounters and phenomena which could be easily explained would be released. The other cases, those where an ET explanation was very difficult to avoid, would be classified. The filtering arrangement is now public knowledge because, from the turn of the new millennium, countries around the world began vacating those departments. Then, beginning in 2008, those who had previously staffed the filtering departments were allowed to form an international body called the Disclosure Project, which in the years since has campaigned publicly for declassification of all government and military UFO files. If that were not surprising enough, over the next 5 years, a huge volume of previously classified government material was released. Case files detailing phenomena publicly witnessed, filmed, examined by military and civil authorities, cases where an ET explanation was simply unavoidable. All these case studies are now in the public domain. By contrast, the USA has not yet participated in this exercise of declassification. Instead, the USA still enforces the provisions of its 70-year-old National Security Act, signed by President Truman in 1947. It provided for the creation of the CIA and simultaneously classified all UFO investigation in the wake of UFO incidents that year at Maury Island, Washington, and Roswell, New Mexico. Yet, even in the USA, there has been a palpable change in climate. Old patterns of official debunking and ridicule appear to have receded, which is why Colonel Al Worden is only one of many NASA personnel who now feel free to speak openly about ET encounters and phenomena. The number of NASA personnel who have now attested publicly to ET contact include, to name just a few, Mercury astronauts Gordon Cooper, Scott Carpenter, and Donald Slayton, Apollo astronauts Eugene Cernan, Colonel Al Worden, Colonel Buzz Aldrin, Dr. Brian O'Leary, Edgar Allan Mitchell, and Lieutenant Colonel Onizuka. That's quite a body of credible witnesses. The darker side of what has emerged into the open is an awareness in retrospect of the cruel psychological pressures previously placed upon witnesses and the families of witnesses, a regime of violent gag orders and death threats, particularly following the famous crash incident in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Dr. Edgar Allan Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, grew up in Roswell. A man of transparent honor, intelligence, and good character, he found himself sought out by numbers of the old-timers, as he called them, who were anxious to tell him their family stories and share their experiences. Dr. Mitchell spoke innumerable times on camera concerning his desire to see government disclose what he believed to be at least 70 years of ongoing contact. His motivations were firstly to see what new chapter in human economics and politics would be possible through the availability of zero-point energy and free energy which he believed to be at our disposal as a result of contact. He also wished deeply to honor the families of his fellow townspeople who in previous years had been silenced through the era of gag orders and threats against themselves and their families. This story arc tells us of another, more sinister kind of forgetting. The kind of forgetting which is forced upon people when authorities lean over them and say, "We did not see what you saw, and neither did you." I applaud the new climate in which NASA personnel can speak openly and without fear. I think the shift can be read in a couple of ways. It could be that at the beginning of the 21st century, governments around the world simply agreed together that no one really cares anymore. Alternatively, it could be that the change reflects a passive acceding to history, a policy of soft disclosure. From where I was looking, the new soft policy began to show up in some surprising places. For instance, in 2011, there was a very curious public spat between the USA and the British government. The issue revolved around America's demands for the extradition of a computer hacker by the name of Gary McKinnon. In his leisure, McKinnon had managed to view and extract data, images, and text from NASA computers, which appeared to indicate a level of ET contact and collaboration. The matter was discussed publicly in Parliament. You can even watch it on YouTube. And the British government responded with an uncharacteristically hard line towards their international ally. Britain refused to extradite Gary McKinnon to the USA, where he was being threatened with a potential 60 years in jail. In fact, the British government went further by passing a bill through Parliament to alter the UK's extradition laws with the USA in order to protect Gary McKinnon. It was a bit surreal watching the very public discussion of this conflict play out in Parliament. The reporting of NASA's images of ET craft and names of ET officers, without any official comment ever being made as to the credibility or implications of the data itself, was even more curious. I might have paid little attention to these winds of change in the public discussion of ET hypotheses if it weren't for a move from the Vatican, which I definitely did not see coming. In May 2008, a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest by the name of Father Jose Gabriel Funes began writing and speaking to the media about possibility of ET contact. This would have been unremarkable if Father Funes had not been a senior Vatican theologian and director of the Vatican Observatory. The substance of Father Funes' statements was that Christian believers needed to be ready sooner than anyone anticipates to love our extraterrestrial brothers and sisters. To me, the language Father Funes used as making theological room for a brother alien indicated that the Vatican was preparing us not for a find of bacteria under a rock or a patch of algae on a distant moon. They were preparing the faithful for contact or disclosure of contact with other civilizations. If that weren't enough of a theological bombshell, Father Funes' press release turned out to be only the prelude to something even more public. In 2009, during his brief tenure as Pope, Benedict XVI called upon the Pontifical Academy of Sciences to convene an international colloquium specifically to discuss the theological implications of contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. I had never heard the like. The colloquium of 30 scientists and theologians met for a 5-day closed-room session, resulting in a formal press release on behalf of the Vatican in November 2009. In the words of Father Funes, astrobiology does not conflict with our faith because we cannot put limits on the creative freedom of God. To say it with St. Francis of Assisi, if we can consider earthly creatures as brothers or sisters, why could we not speak of a brother alien? He would also belong to the creation. As a multiplicity of creatures exist on earth, so there could be other beings, also intelligent, created by God. The Vatican's announcement made me wonder if Rome might be expecting a sooner than anyone anticipates disclosure from other authoritative sources and wanted to get in ahead of the game to reassure the faithful. For a colloquium to be convened with a remit like that, and for statements to be released that were as bold as that, all under a pope as conservative as Benedict XVI, signaled a dramatic departure for the Vatican. After all, it was only a short 400 years ago that the same authorities were burning people at the stake for merely suggesting that intelligent species might inhabit other planets. If I had read the cuneiform stories before these climactic changes, I would have been less inclined to give them the same hearing. This is because the credence we give to data has something to do with the merits of the data in question and a whole lot to do with our control beliefs. If I believe that we are alone in the universe, then as a believer I might accept the reality of entities affirmed by my faith community. God, humans, angels, demons. But I automatically rule out any other species or intelligence. If we believe that there is only us, then we have to view as fiction any of these plural Elohim, E.T. Ben Elohim, Sumerian sky people, or E.T. interference in human progress. We have to rule out the notion of memory being held in our ancient mythologies. Our control beliefs rule that out. Control beliefs tend to shift slowly. It's true for an individual and even truer for a culture. So it was only a moment in such a paradigm shift when, on May 9, 2001, more than 60 military, government, corporate, civil aviation, and scientific witnesses gathered at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., to present on their personal knowledge of ET contact and ET-related technologies. Many of the witnesses were men in their senior years who were breaching their security agreements and protocols and decades of official silence as they testified in front of a major media presence. A number wept as they spoke for the first time of their knowledge and overcame the power of orders, threats, and programming that had kept them silent for decades. For our cultural worldview to shift and for control beliefs to unravel takes courageous moments like these and a great many of them. Such moments also need the oxygen of publicity. The 2001 disclosure event was attended by a number of major media outlets who all chose not to report the event. However, other agencies were willing to publicize the event, among them a member of the Vatican Curia, the governing body of the Roman Catholic Church. His name was Monsignor Corrado Balducci, a close friend of Pope John Paul II, who served the Archdiocese of Rome as a senior theologian and exorcist. So the public statements he went on to make following the disclosure event of 2001 were significant. He said, ET encounters are not demonic. They are not due to psychological impairment. They are not a case of entity attachment. These encounters deserve to be studied carefully. Monsignor Balducci's statements were soon followed by statements from another senior figure in Roman Catholicism, Reverend Dr. Guy Consolmagano, a senior astronomer at the Vatican Observatory at Mount Graham, Arizona. Speaking in Harper's Magazine in 2006, he addressed the question of how we interpret our sacred text and what kinds of entities we might expect to find in them. He quotes Jesus' enigmatic words from the Gospel of John. I have others who are not of this fold. I must bring them also. Dr. Consolmagano goes on. There are unquestionably non-human, intelligent beings in the Bible. Any creature of this universe, created and loved by the same God who created and loves us, would they deserve to be called alien? The conversations of the 21st century permit us to ask different questions than in times past. In this new climate of soft disclosure, I could see too much agreement to dismiss the Sumerian legends as pure fiction. Now I could permit myself to ask whether the Sumerian and Babylonian mythologies might actually be the vehicles of ancient memory, shining a light on the nature of our plural Elohim. If the Reverend Doctors Funes, Balducci, and Consolmagano are right, and we and our interstellar neighbors really are family, then how exactly are we related? Should we be thinking in Father Funes' language of a brother alien? Or are we, in the words of Eric von Daniken, children of the extraterrestrials? Or is the combined chorus of Colonel Al Warden, plural Genesis, and the Mesopotamian and Mesoamerican mythologies on point in identifying us as the aliens, a hybrid race engineered by ET half-siblings? Maxim Makalov and Vladimir Shcherbak believe they know the answer. The two scientists from the Al-Farabi Kazakh National University and the Fesenko Astrophysical Institute have devoted 13 years to the Human Genome Project, mapping human DNA coding. Together, they have concluded that human beings were intelligently designed with what they describe as arithmetic patterns and symbolic language encoded into our DNA. The team published its findings for peer review in the international science journal Icarus. Their conclusion is that 97% of our DNA non-coding sequences, what in the past had been colloquially described as junk coding, is in reality not junk at all, but is in fact genetic code from non-terrestrial life forms. If that sounds like alternative science, Makalov and Shcherbak are far from alone in their position. Neither are they on the fringe of their field. In fact, The two are among the highest authorities in contemporary DNA research. The bare bones of their thesis have been argued by another significant figure in DNA research as far back as 1981. The paper that presented the case was co-authored by chemist Leslie Orgel and physicist-biologist Francis Crick. Francis Crick is a similar name, being one half of Watson and Crick, the scientific partnership awarded the Nobel Prize in 1962 for their discovery of the double helix structure of DNA. So these are not the opinions of flakes. They are authoritative voices. And by way of an interesting footnote, the journal in which Orgel and Crick published their pioneering paper on ET seeding was edited at the time by our friend Carl Sagan. In Carl Sagan's novel Contact, the sign proving the intelligent alien authorship of the interstellar signal was the repetition in the code of prime numbers. This was a wake-up signal. The ET intelligence knew that prime numbers would get our attention because they are not numbers that ordinarily occur in natural patterns. Makulov and Shusterbek's evidence is that the prime number signature has indeed been broadcast to us from another intelligence, but not from outer space. The code littered with the prime number signature is our genetic code. Throughout the genetic code of human DNA, numbers keep cropping up that are multiples of 37. The Russian physicist Yuri Rumer first identified one set of repetitions back in 1966. Makulov and Shusterbek have identified 9 multiples of 37 throughout our code. Speaking to New Scientist, Makulov described the pattern as very hard to ascribe to natural processes. If that repetition of prime multiples doesn't strike you as odd, Makulov and Shusterbek point out that the chances of such a repetition is 1 in 10 trillion. With a mastery of understatement, Makulov explained, it was clear right away that the code had a non-random structure. Accordingly, the pair have concluded from their 13 years of research that the sudden boom in evolution experienced on Earth billions of years ago was not a matter of chance mutation. Makulov writes, sooner or later, we have to accept the fact that all life on Earth carries the genetic code of our extraterrestrial cousins and that evolution is not what we think it is. This DNA evidence brings credibility and a finesse to the 50-year-old story of panspermia, in which some other intelligence sees the Milky Way with the genetic codes for intelligent biological life. Popularized in the 60s by Eric von Daniken, the theory clearly inspired Carl Sagan's Contact, as well as the movie lore of Ridley Scott's Prometheus and Nick Meyer's Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. In their paper in Icarus, Makulov and Shusterbek have this to say about the interstellar transmission of the coding for intelligence. Once fixed, the code might stay unchanged over cosmological timescales. In fact, it is the most durable construct known. Once the genome is appropriately rewritten, the new code with the signature will stay frozen in the cell and its progeny, which might then be delivered through space and time. It represents an exceptionally reliable storage for an intelligent signature. If Crick, Orgel, Makulov, and Shusterbek are correct in their theory, then our intersection with at least some of our interstellar neighbors may be less a case of chance discovery and more a case of seeding and follow-up. The theory of panspermia carries sufficient weight among the scientific community that some serious money has been invested into its exploration. As a test for the theory, the European Space Agency launched a probe in March 2004 to study a comet with the catchy name 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko. The probe's assignment was to make the first controlled landing on a comet and look for signs of DNA. The name of the probe was Rosetta, in honor of the Rosetta Stone, the historic code breaker for the hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. On November 12, 2014, after a decade of patient pursuit, Rosetta launched on the comet's surface and began its prospecting work. Using a mass spectrometer, the probe detected the presence of phosphorus and the amino acid glycine. Both are crucial to the structure of DNA, protein, and cell membranes. A jubilant scientist on the project by name of Matt Taylor told the press, "This means that comets contain an awesome cocktail of organic material that, if provided with the right conditions, could then go on to form life. Panspermia suddenly had wheels. Movie lore tells another, more cinematic version of the story. If you have seen Ridley Scott's Alien or Prometheus, or James Cameron's Avatar or Passengers, you will be familiar with the idea of sending people or creatures on immense journeys through space in an interstellar arc. Walking around the ship, we find the people cryogenically frozen or deep in a state of hypersleep, each in their own stasis pod to be opened on arrival. We may even find other creatures or clones growing in their artificial gestation pods, ready to hatch when the ark finally reaches the planet for colonization. You may think that 21st century scriptwriters have really pushed the boat out with these kinds of imaginings. It may sound like a rewriting of Noah's Ark on steroids. In fact, these interstellar stories resound the notes of another ancient mythology. It is one of the most original and oldest of creation myths, the Zulu legend of Unkulunkulu. The tale of Unkulunkulu paints a beautiful and evocative scene, a powerfully cinematic version of panspermia. According to the Zulu legend, the human story begins when there was nothing but darkness and the earth was a lifeless rock. From out of the darkness, the being known as Umvelinkangi sends a seed to earth. Within the seed is the life from which all life on earth has descended. The seed lands in the soil and sprouts into a bed of reeds full of seed pods. The bed of reeds is called Uzlanga. In one of the seed pods, there grew a man called Unkulunkulu, the first ancestor. At first, he is a tiny speck. Little by little, he grows and forms until Unkulunkulu is so large and heavy that the pod falls off the reed and bursts open. As Unkulunkulu walks around, he finds other people in their seed pods. Unkulunkulu opens up their pods and releases them. They are the first humans and the ancestors of all the nations of the world. As Unkulunkulu continues his walk around Uthalanga, he finds many forms of life growing in their own seed pods. Breaking their pods open, Unkulunkulu gathers the fish and throws them into the rivers. He gathers the birds and antelope and releases them into the wild. He corrals the cattle and sends the predators into the jungle and plains. But the humans are not entirely alone. To help the humans progress from subsistence living to prosperity, a female entity by the name of Mabab Mawana Waresa arrives and teaches the humans how to farm and how to make beer. I love that detail. Beer is the product of cultivated grains, so beer and farming go together. The Zulu praise Mabab Mawana Waresa for these great gifts to humankind. However, there is a dark element to the story too. Like the story of the Afik, the Popol Vuh, the cuneiforms, and Genesis, the Zulu story tells of death and of making humans mortal. Unkulunkulu sends a chameleon to tell the humans will not die, but the chameleon was too slow. It is beaten by a lizard who is smarter and faster. Unfortunately, the faster reptile comes with a different message. Humans will die. From that day to this, humans have been mortal. In this last part of the story, we hear an echo of the conflict between Enlil and Enki over the plan to genocide humanity by means of the flood. It is echoes of the agreement of the sky people and the powerful ones to limit human lifespans and make humans mortal. Both elements are in the biblical narrative too. The Zulu legend holds many layers for the Zulu people, and I would not wish to trespass on all those beautiful and sacred layers. But the motif of life on earth, the seed from plant, animal, and human life, arriving on earth from another place, is a story too powerful and too resonant for the wider world to ignore. And might there be a reason that contemporary storytellers brings us this telling so many times over? Fiction resonates the longest when it speaks the truth about ourselves. Could the Zulu legend be a case in point? Of course, ultimately none of this speaks to the question of the original source of life, only the way in which life and intelligence might migrate through the universe. Makulov and Schusterbeck's vision is not of a spaceship with stasis pods, but of objects such as comets carrying the DNA coding of the parent culture through the galaxy. The senders have disseminated the coding into the Milky Way, knowing that hospitable planets will grow and multiply the life forms encoded in the DNA sequences. In this biological diaspora, the senders are literally sowing the seeds of civilizations which, eons into the future, they will be ready to follow up. My question in the light of Makalov and Sherserbek's thesis was exactly what that follow-up might look like. Might it involve a little further tweaking? The kind of tweaking that turns a primate into a hominid into a Homo erectus, and a Homo erectus into a human? This concludes Chapter 10. Peace and blessings to you all.